morning. I'm Karen Christensen, host of Train Time, and I have a very special guest for you today, Ian Hodkinson of Alstom, based in Montreal, who is the technical and business director of transit systems at Alstom, which is a big, obvious, an international rail company. You can tell us more. You can correct me in any way you like. I'm welcoming it.
Well, thank you so much, Karen. It's nice to meet you. And indeed, Alstom is, I think it's the company with possibly the broadest reach in the world in terms of passenger rail. And we have, I think one of our claims to fame is also that we have the broadest scope of different types of products. So we do everything from light rail trains up to high-speed trains like TGVs in France, and a little bit of everything in between, including monorails, automated people movers, metros and subway systems, and all kinds of fun stuff like that.
Because I'm very interested in those. Instead of thinking of one type of train, when people tend to, whatever they're most familiar with, whether it's in the U.S., Amtrak trains or the Boston T, where in fact there's all kinds of different rail systems, and that is something I'd love to get across. But what's really on our mind, what brought you to us at Train Time, the big thing was talking about climate resilience, because I think that Alstom has been doing a lot. In fact, I was looking at your website, and there's really a lot about sustainability there.
Yeah, I mean,
and so talk us through how does this extreme weather we're experiencing relate to existing rail and to strategies for future rail?
Sure. So, I mean, first of all, sustainability is something that's incredibly important to us. And we're in the process of reducing and even eliminating carbon to the greatest extent possible from being consumed by our products, i.e. diesel trains, which burn gas and give off CO2. But we're also looking at reducing the carbon emissions from our operations pretty much around the world. So yeah, sustainability is something that we're absolutely looking forward to, and something that we think needs to be factored in as part of the rail industry. So there's lots of different ways to do that. Before we jump in, I thought there's a funny story that I could share, which is a few years ago, I was working on a project in Florida. I'll spare you exactly where in Florida. And one of my colleagues brought up a point and said, I'm really, really concerned about community feedback around our traction power substation. So the traction power substation is the device which basically converts electricity from the grid into power for trains. And normally, these are kind of small kind of buildings or bungalows that are kind of scattered here and there around the rail system. And he said, yeah, but you realize that this needs to be 6 feet off the ground. And I sort of stopped and thought, well, 6 feet off the ground? Why would you? Yes, I can understand why people would be concerned if all of a sudden you have this huge structure 6 feet up in the air. And he explained it was because of sea level rise. And so basically the thing is that because you're concerned about sea level rise, you need to physically jack the substation 6 feet up in the air. And that's the best way to make it resilient, because heaven forbid you have a flood or a sea level event. The idea is you just put the equipment up high enough that it's out of the way and won't get damaged. Yeah.
Yeah. I remember I was in New York during Hurricane Sandy, and the boilers were in the basements. In those days.
Yeah.
And they got flooded. And then they started moving them up.
Exactly. And so that was just an interesting story that made me realize, this is real. And actually, it's very heartening to hear that people are thinking about it. I think one of the tricks with resilience, I think there's a few things, first of all, even before jumping into the technicalities of making the train system resilient, one of the things I don't think that we think enough about is we realized if you think about transportation systems as a whole, rail is a kind of a resilient element in of itself, right? Because a lot of the time train tracks are on a separate path and in a separate guideway, et cetera, and independent of the road network, they complement the road network. And that gives our overall transportation network resilience. And I think that's, it's one of the things that's wonderful is people talk about the transportation cocktail, and I'm lucky because living in Montreal, I get to experience it where I can wake up and decide I'm going to take a bike or a car or take the train or bus. But having that multimodality is something that gives already a degree of resilience to our transportation network.
Good point. Very good point. Yeah.
But then if we think about the technicalities, then it's a multifaceted approach that's required. Yes, there's trains and building trains to be more resilient for extreme heat or cold or things like that. And we do a little bit of all those things. But then there's also things like infrastructure. And making sure that the infrastructure is itself resilient and able to resist to different stressors and things like that. So, what one of the big problems that happens with track is that when there's extreme heat, the tracks actually buckle or can actually snap and disrupt service. So, thinking about how to make
Is
track
that
more.
what they're concerned about in France? I saw that some trains were being canceled, but I wasn't sure if that
Well,
was the heat or the fires.
yeah, I'm not. Well, I'm not sure actually. I don't know on that specific case, but
Mhm.
one of the things we are running into across both the U.S. and Canada is as temperatures, average temperatures are going up. One of the things is that continuous welded rail, which is the type of rail that we have in most train
Yeah,
tracks, is like a constant ribbon of metal, if you will. And so
yeah.
as it heats up, it squeezes against its neighbors more and more and more and more and more, and that builds up pressure. And eventually, at some point, what happens is you can just have a snap where it pops out.
So those even though those welding points could snap.
Exactly.
Yeah,
It's the
we have
train.
weld rail here replacing the old 25-foot rail. But yeah, I see.
And so when you have that, one of the tricks is that there's in designing that rail, one of the tricks is to try and anticipate what temperature you want it to be able to meet to. And so
Yeah.
historically, those have been kind of lower, kind of in the
Mhm.
80s and 90s. But now, as we're seeing climate change increase, one of the challenges is to try and design that rail temperature for higher and higher temperatures so that you don't have that snapping and the issues that come along with it and stuff
And
like
what
that.
do you do? Use different welding material or technique or
It's
what?
actually more to do with the way you tension the rails. So part of the thing is that when you weld the rails together, you actually have to put them under pressure. You kind of squeeze them
Uh-huh,
to try and
uh-huh.
anticipate and simulate this pressure. And so part of that squeezing and the amount of pressure that you put onto it is is a function of what temperature it's eventually going to achieve. And so
Oh,
you have to kind of
uh-huh.
anticipate what temperature you think you want to design it for
You'd
and then
sort of
squeeze it accordingly.
recalibrate
Yeah.
how it's uh-huh.
Exactly.
Yeah,
So yeah, I mean that's one example. We're getting into the
yeah,
details a little bit, but yeah, no, I mean there's thinking about infrastructure. So where do the tracks go? What temperature, as we said, the tracks are going for? Thinking about things like flooding. Are we going to be in a floodplain or not?
uh-huh.
Making sure that that infrastructure is in a position to better resist events that come forward, and also trying to predict on a locality by locality basis what are the events that you're going to need. Are all kind of part and parcel with doing the planning required to try and make our rail systems more resilient.
Someone told me once, some rail guy I've talked to, that keeping the water draining away from the rail was, like, the most important thing. I I don't know if it's true, but he said, "Just drainage, 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 drainage."
It's true. It's true. Drainage is extraordinarily important, and it's funny. It seems so basic, but we were just talking about earlier about rain and extreme rain and things like that.
Yeah.
It's one of the types of characteristic events that we're seeing are these kind of intense rain or intense precipitation.
Mm.
And as we do so, and as we see these higher rain events, just ensuring that massive amount of water can flow away from the track bed and has somewhere to go, and that flow away has enough capacity to absorb all that water is part of ensuring that the water doesn't come up over the rails and eventually impact surface. So it seems kind of like it's funny
Right.
because it seems almost like an obvious thing, but it's really something I think we need to think about as we go forward.
So, it I think when we first think about water and flooding, we think about, as you were saying, the sea level rise. But I know I live in New England, and we've had a couple of hurricanes that have washed out. I don't know why we've been lucky, touch wood, lucky so far here in the
Yeah,
Berkshires, but Vermont and the Catskills, so similar, mountainous areas, have had terrible flash flooding, that's really been destructive. Now, I haven't seen anything about trains there. I wasn't looking to see what, but it's certainly, I know that train lines here run along the river.
absolutely. And there was an event a few years ago. I wanted to say it was in 2000 or 2020 or 2021, something along those lines. It was during COVID in Toronto, where Toronto received a
Uh-huh.
tremendous amount of water in a very short period of time, and trains were stranded, and there was an impact on service and transit and transportation around the city as a whole. And certainly there were some cases where there was a lot of reflection, I think, afterwards about how to make the network more resilient. And it reminds me of another interesting story, which is that
Mhm.
in France, one of the things that we have, we like everywhere, we're starting to see more flooding and things like that. And some of our light rail vehicles, there's actually a video out there you can see where our light rail vehicles are actually going through flooded sections. So even though there's kind of a foot of water on the
Uh-huh.
ground, they're still able to actually kind of
Yep.
navigate through. I think that's kind of an example of the
I
kind of
was
things. Yeah,
Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering about that because I can remember talking to somebody who drove the trains years ago, and he would say that, when they they snow rarely stopped them.
yeah,
Trains are really, really great at, you know, ignoring the weather,
yeah,
and just carrying on. I mean, it is one of the great advantages with, what they can they I guess some of them. Well, there's old movies, aren't there, with snow plows
yeah,
on the front of
absolutely.
trains and stuff.
Yeah,
So there's always that. So, we have obviously existing tracks. Do you What do you think we're gonna end up having to do about existing rail in I g now, at first tell me, in Canada,
yeah.
is the system similar to what we have these, in the US, sort of, around urban centers, we have some commuter rail, and then we have, some of the old long distance rail, but there's quite a lot of freight rather
Yeah.
than passenger.
Yeah, I mean, Canada's there's a lot of similarities between Canada and the US. So our freight system is basically this very similar to the US freight system. We have
Mhm,
two main carriers, and some of the big US carriers operate in Canada as well. So, and much like in the US, there are commuter rails around systems around the major cities. So Canada, or excuse me, Montreal, Toronto, and Vancouver both all have commuter rail systems.
mhm.
Those systems run on a mix of the class one freight railroad tracks, and some of them operate on their own tracks, which is fortuitous. But the impact is that question
Uh-huh.
about competing with freight, or the dynamic between freight and passenger rail is
Yep.
very true.
Yes. Yes.
And the same is true for our
Uh-huh.
intercity. So much as Amtrak in the US operates primarily on host railroad tracks or class one freight track, the same is true in Canada, and that Via Rail operates
Uh-huh.
primarily on host railroads. And there's a dynamic there because the legislation in Canada is actually a little bit more conducive for the freight railroads, and that freight railroads actually have priority over passenger. And so one of the challenges is that
Oh, where in theory, they don't here. In
exactly.
reality, they do.
Exactly. And so yeah, that has impact on time performance and things like that. And it's a real challenge for the operator here in Canada. So very similar in that regard. One place where things are a little bit different is on in urban systems. So when I mean urban, I'm thinking about light rail or subways and things like that. And
Uh-huh.
that we have
Uh-huh.
a little bit more adoption of some European standards. So we see a little bit more European type trains in light rail systems and in urban subway and metro systems and things like that. So there's a little bit more of a mix on urban systems, whereas commuter and intercity are very, very, very similar to what we see in the United States.
Mhm. Mhm. Yeah, the freight passenger thing really hit me because my son is traveling by train from Seattle to the East Coast
Wow.
and had a 5-hour gap in Chicago to
Wow.
get, but he missed the connection
Oh, oh no.
to the Lakeshore Limited. He
Yeah.
was going from the Empire Builder to the
Yeah.
Lakeshore Limited. 5 hours. They were more than 5 hours late,
Oh,
so
geez.
he's stuck for a day.
Stuck for a day.
Um, and, you know, uh, he knew he had to roll with the punches. He knew he was taking some risk. But, I mean, that is not, as far as I'm concerned, a way to run a railroad. So, I but that is common enough that we weren't startled by it. Disappointed, but not surprised. Let's talk about the future. A bit of a glitch there, but we're back with you, and Ian, what should people know about climate resilience in trains? What do you think the most, just like regular folk who ride trains, who love trains?
Well, I think there's a few things. I think one is I think that trains have the potential to be an extraordinarily resilient mode of transportation, right? I mean, I think you mentioned earlier the great example of snow. I mean, how trains can get through snow and weather we never imagined driving through, and trains
Mm,
kind of still plow through. And we also talked about flooding and the possibility that trains can ford flooding. So, and also the transit cocktail we discussed earlier. So I think trains can be this incredibly powerful tool in offering a more resilient transportation system. I think I think kind of the key to realizing that potential though is design, right? And I
Mhm.
see that at two levels, which is that we're very lucky in both the US and Canada that we're still in a phase where we're building new systems and looking to
Mhm.
expand rail
Yeah,
networks.
yeah.
And so as we do, I think we need to factor in, resilience designs from the get-go. Talking about resilience and
Mhm.
extreme weather is something that we need to think as part of the design criteria from the beginning. And the complement to that is as we renew pieces of old infrastructure, bridges, rights of way, et cetera, to also factor them in then, because as soon as we touch part of the system, it's an opportunity to go and think about how we can make the overall system more resilient and make it more, ensure that when you are stuck somewhere, that it's not because of weather and you can get out because of weather.
Right. And is that being done? It
I think to some degree, I don't think it's uniform across. I mean, we shared the
Mhm.
example of the system in Florida with the traction power
Yeah,
substation 6 feet in the
yeah.
well. So clearly, it is being taken into account in some cases in some locales. I don't think it's systematic. So I
Mhm.
think something that we need to start doing is, and I think it's a broad field, Garrett, because the first kind of step of the problem is what is that extreme weather? We need to sort of project and say
Yeah.
what are those extremes? Is it high temperature? Is it the flooding we're talking about? Is it blizzards? What is it? And
Mhm.
having that, we can then, from a design perspective, start to say, well, okay, we need to think about a train or infrastructure that can resist against those elements. And I think we need to do that almost as systematically as every new system we build. We should be factoring in some of those considerations and
Mm.
ensuring that there is some of that resilience baked in from the get go.
Like they're building or hoping to build a tunnel under the Hudson,
Right.
big
Yeah.
so that would be one thing. New York subway systems, we know flood flood. Although I was reading about a place, in the London subway that the tube, somewhere on the outskirts, one of the, out in Greater London, but it was flooding, and they did something with kind of wetlands or planting stuff to so there are all these creative things going on. I mean, how much are these good ideas from one country, one place, or one country being shared?
Well, it's interesting. You bring up a great point, in that we're only just starting to see preliminary guidelines and I don't want to say rules and regulations, but studies that are being done on kind of different. So, for instance, APTA in the US has a series of guidelines that were published only a few years ago that share kind of best practices that
Yeah.
kind of consolidate all of kind of the best practices in one place. And so it's a fascinating read and covers a broad spectrum of topics. In Canada, the Canadian Standards Association has a great document that actually it's a very easy read and really boils down basically what transportation systems should do going forward and gives them a kind of basic framework.
Uh-huh.
And
Uh-huh.
it's one of the things that we can bring to the table too, because we operate on an international basis. So we build trains for the deserts in the Middle East as much as we build trains for Arctic climates in Scandinavia and Canada and stuff like that. So one of the things we do is actually to try and liaise and ensure that our experts from around the world bring their expertise to bear on topics like resilience, and it's something that we can bring to the table as with an international footprint that makes us a little bit.
Really important. I mean, I was looking when I was looking at your website, I said Egypt, Sweden, Melbourne.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
thought that is a pretty good range. And obviously there's much to be learned from, both on terms of cost, but in terms of technology from other places, and one of the issues that I wonder if this is true in Canada here, because things are done so much under the federal system, so much state by state, that it really and there's often not the collaboration that one would like to see. Do you have that issue in Canada?
Well, it's. I mean, the question of governance is an interesting one because it does vary a little bit from mainly from province to province.
Mhm.
So each of our provinces have structured. I mean, there's some organizations like Metrolinx in Toronto, which is really an umbrella organization which covers all of the transportation operations and planning and they've been doing tremendous work developing new systems in and around Toronto. It's a little bit different with TransLink in Vancouver, slightly different governance structure. but there is strong collaboration between those different agencies, and it's a we're geographically vast as a country, but in terms
Yeah.
of number of agencies, it's not as numerous as it is in the U.S. And so
Uh,
I think there's somewhat tighter links between different transit
yeah.
agencies to share a little bit of best practices and things
I
like
think
that.
that would be helpful. I mean, where are there points when the US and Canada collaborate? And of course, I've just read that Mexico seems to be planning to invest more in trains too. So we've got North America. I mean, I was just in Mexico and there weren't really any, much in the way of trains, but that would be really great.
Well, there's a fantastic project in the Yucatan Peninsula that we collaborated on called the Train Maya, which just went into service a
Uh-huh.
few years ago, which operates all the way from Tulum all the way around to, I think it's Merida, if I'm getting it wrong, and I forget if I got the terminal, but it's hundreds and hundreds of miles of transit. And so there is a real push in Mexico to develop
Yeah.
more and more rail, and the government we know, as you mentioned, is looking at new rail systems and things like
Yeah.
that, which is, I think, would be fantastic. It's a tremendous potential for, as you say, both for North America, but also for Mexico as well.
Yeah.
Um, yeah, no, and it's interesting because even in those contexts, we see a study of extremes, and some of the challenges we see in Mexico are things like extreme rain events and storm on the
Yeah.
Yucatan. Here in Canada, we have a system which operates in Edmonton, called the Edmonton Valley Line Southeast,
Mhm.
which, I mean, Edmonton has winter. It's
Oh, I
my
bet in Canada has winter,
that's right.
real winter,
And
yeah,
it's they
real
get. I mean,
deal.
here's the refreshing thing is from a units perspective, they get down to -40, and at -40, it doesn't matter whether we're talking about Fahrenheit or Celsius. Uh, we just understand each other. It's cold, and yeah, and we still, even though they get extreme winter and extreme cold, we're hitting just around 99% on time performance. So
Oh, isn't that
even in
interesting?
extreme weather,
Yeah,
you can
yeah,
provide
yeah,
real reliable service,
yeah.
regardless of vast climate changes.
I was just talking to one of my colleagues last night. We did a sort of chat call, and we were just saying if people just realized how great trains are, just a lot of Americans haven't experienced, and probably that's true of Canadians, where Europeans have had, and people in China have taken to the trains like crazy, but a lot of people have in America have never. I never rode a train till I was 18 or something in England. I'd never been near a train. So that and that example of, that they just trains just carry on. There's such a amazing reliability there. So I wanna pick your brains about electrification because that comes up a
Sure.
lot. It's a question I get, and I don't know enough about it. So, what about electrifying, existing lines and then planning that into, new projects?
Sure. I mean, the great news about electrification is the base technology is something that we know pretty well, right? I mean, it's something that's been around for, good heavens, probably 100 years or thereabouts.
Mhm.
Where there's so we I mean, as a technology, it's, and also trains that are electrified, as we know from Europe, there's lots of trains available. So from a rolling stock perspective, it's definitely something we can do.
Uh-huh.
The challenge, and where we see a challenge, is on the economics, and there's an interesting discussion here, is around basically when does it make economic sense? Because obviously, like all things, there's a cost with electrifying. You have to go and
Yeah.
put up the poles, put in traction power
Yeah.
substations, string the catenary, et cetera. And so, what we've often shared as kind of a perspective is that it's really a function of how much traffic tends to be on the line. So there's
Uh-huh.
kind of a business case almost to be made around, very high density lines that where you see very frequent trains, and there's no absolute number, but
Mhm.
conceptually, you have, say, multiple trains an hour.
Right.
Then there starts to be a case where you can say, okay, well, the expense of putting up the wire makes sense, right? Because that
Yeah.
that allows you to do so. There's there's on lines where
Yep,
there's less
definitely.
traffic. One of the things we're seeing in Europe is actually, this is where battery trains and even
I
hydrogen
wanted
powered
to ask
trains.
you about that. Yes,
Yeah.
yes.
So and it's interesting because really where battery trains and hydrogen trains are taking off in Europe is on lower density lines. So if you even look at a map of electrification of Europe, it's all the high density, high speed lines, but then also
Mhm,
the lines that
mhm.
have lots of traffic on them. They have electrification. Whereas the kind of smaller line that's maybe a single track.
We're back again, carrying on. We're going to beat we don't let technology get
We
in our way.
will. Dare I make the pun, Karen, that we'll be resilient?
We are resilient. All right. And we're talking about electric trains. And I'm so glad you bring up this thing about battery. So where are they being used, and what does that mean for us?
So, I mean, really what we're seeing in Europe is it tends to be what we over here would call regional rail lines, which is something I'll loop back and explain that in a second. But so it's lower density lines that connect small communities. And the way I kind of explain it
Hmm.
in North American terms, it's kind of like a Greyhound bus, but on rails, essentially. And
Hmm.
so these
Hmm.
smaller communities only need maybe a few trains a day, four, five, six conceptually, let's say.
Yeah.
And given that there's so little traffic, it doesn't really make a lot of sense for the operators to string up electric wires and things like that.
Hmm.
So the solution is to put batteries on board the trains. And
Hmm.
so what's fascinating though, from an operational perspective, particularly with battery trains, is that battery train can conceptually run under a catenary, so under an overhead wire when one's available and be recharging its batteries. And then it switches off to to the unelectrified
Uh-huh.
portion and just keeps running off of its own battery power. And so
Oh,
it
yeah.
gives a lot of flexibility. And so to your question from a North American perspective, certainly conceptually, I think there's a lot of lines, a lot of opportunities to use that type of technology as a solution for reducing
Hmm.
carbon footprint in the States. The big challenge is where to put the recharging points though, is where do you put
Uh-huh.
overhead wire for them to
Uh-huh.
recharge, because so little
Uh-huh.
of our network in North America is electrified. And so
Uh-huh.
that's been one of the real challenges, because we've looked into this with a
Uh-huh.
number of customers. And one of the things that keeps coming back is, well, I have to put in a substation. How does that work? How do I put in the wire?
Uh-huh.
Stuff like that.
Uh-huh.
But conceptually,
Uh-huh.
it's certainly something that could work over here. And I know that a number of authorities, like the MBTA, but amongst others, are looking at electrification and battery powers as an alternative here as well.
That's really great. What about the equipment? That's the other thing that comes up a lot, and that I find, when you know, I, I was reading about Eurostar was changing their order for
Mhm.
cars to make them more heat resistant, but it was also they could do it because there was a very long time span till they were going to get, like, the delivery was 2029 or something, and I don't think we make do we what train equipment do we make in North America?
Well, so yeah, so the Eurostar order is an order for our Avelia Horizon. So Avelia Horizon is a
Mhm.
double deck high speed train. So it's a train that can go up
Uh-huh.
to 320 kilometers per hour. So that's doing the conversion. It's 180, 200 miles per hour, roughly
Mhm.
speaking. And indeed, there was a request to increase the temperature to 55 Celsius, and what that
Mhm.
entails is things like making heating and ventilation and air conditioning units that are more performant, um,
Uh-huh.
making
Mhm.
sure
Yep.
electronics on board are more resilient, and things like that. And what's interesting is we actually do build a similar train in North America, where it's the Avelia Liberty, which is also known as the next generation Acela, or Acela Next Gen,
Uh-huh.
which is going
Uh-huh.
into service on the Northeast Corridor. And that's a train that currently is designed to work at 260 kilometers per hour. So, which is, I want to say 160 miles per hour, but excuse my math if I get it incorrect.
Thank you for yeah, 'cause I'm no good at it, and I'm sorry we still use miles, but,
No, no, it's my apology.
yeah.
But so it is, and the Avelia Liberty is literally shares the DNA with our vehicles, our high speed trains in France and stuff like that. But
Uh-huh.
that said, the Avelia Liberty is the first high speed train of its ilk in North America, and by and large,
Uh-huh.
the other trains that we build in the U.S. and Canada are light rail trains. We have a brand called Citadis, so it's our Citadis type vehicles, or subway cars, or eventually commuter rail cars.
Mhm. Because getting the equipment, say you put in a new passenger rail line or increase service on an existing line. One of the discussions in Massachusetts was about adding service on the east-west line, on
Mhm.
the existing east-west line, not building high-speed rail, but just making it so there was more than one train a day.
Yeah.
And then you start saying, "Is there the equipment to do that?"
Well, there's a real challenge there. It's actually interesting you should bring that up, which is that if you look at all the different authorities that operate trains, passenger trains, be it in the U.S. or Canada, but across the U.S., you'll see that the trains themselves are quite often slightly different, right? They physically look
Yes,
a little bit
yes, they are.
different, right?
I've been noticing that,
Yeah. So
yeah,
some are
yeah.
double decks, some are single decks, et cetera, et cetera. And one of the challenges that I think faces us as an industrial company, but also our customers, is that there's not a high degree of standardization on what type of trains actually operate on all those different types of tracks.
Uh-huh,
And so in cases like the one you're evoking, where, okay, we'd like to add a little bit more
mhm.
capacity to a line, so let's go order two, three, five, 10 more trains.
Yeah,
It's complicated because basically the authority either needs to exercise an option on an existing contract if they already have someone making trains for them,
uh-huh,
but or they need to come up with an entirely new contract. So it's not like with kind of cars where you can sort of say, I'm going to have, give me 10 more off the end of the line when you get the
mhm.
chance to make them for them. We basically often find ourselves having to start up and build entirely new trains because every owner has kind of their own specific specifications.
Oh, and from your point of view, in terms of manufacturing, that must be a nightmare.
It's not very efficient, right? I mean, there's definitely an opportunity
Right,
there.
it
Yeah,
wouldn't be efficient. Yeah.
yeah, yeah. I mean, there's definitely an opportunity there. That's something to be considered to say, well, maybe there's an opportunity to look at a greater degree of standardization. And then we could start
Yeah.
again to a scenario where we are just running the line and you run a few more off the end type of thing. But it's something that's not necessarily the case right now. Um,
Oh, that's part of the complication and the timing. Obviously, it takes
right.
longer if you have to
And
sort of
it's
start afresh. Yeah.
exactly, and also it has the potential to be expensive because there's additional engineering and project costs and things like that which need to be factored in as well. Whereas if there was already something conceptually that's just you're in production, you can just roll a few more off the line. It's
Mm.
more cost effective as well.
Yeah, I mean, to my mind, one of the things that really should change in the United States is that there should be more direction from the National Department of Transportation that would standardize certain things to be, you know, practical like that to make but you'd have to have a national strategy where you say, "We want to improve and expand our rail network,
Yeah, and so
passenger rail network."
it's certainly something that we're talking about with customers because we do get requests like you're highlighting where it's like, oh, I need a few more trains now. What can you guys
Uh-huh,
do? And then we have to sort of look at, well, what do we have in production? This is what we're building. If you want some of these, we could maybe that could work.
uh-huh,
Oh, that's not going to work, et cetera. So yeah, having
yeah,
some kind of a framework which allowed for greater consolidation, I think we could lead to efficiencies and would be a win-win for everyone. I mean, agencies wouldn't have to
yeah,
wait quite as long. They wouldn't have to spend quite as much. So it's certainly something that we think has potential upside for everyone.
good. I think that people who listen to this and who read Trainheim will be, will find because 'cause we're looking for things that can be done and that people with some influence or authority can work towards
Abs-
and promote. So that certainly is one. That's okay. This has been really helpful. I may pick your brains another time about some other technical issue with rail. I mean, I go down. I knew nothing about this, but I'd go down and sometimes when they were putting in the new rail, I'm going and I'm touching it. Just
Well, you'd find we have a facility here just outside of Montreal called our prototyping center where we literally try out new techniques and technologies
uh-huh.
and intentionally break things and do fun stuff like that. So if you're ever in the Montreal area, let us know. We can.
Oh, I actually have been talking about going. I want to make a trip to Canada.
Sure.
Just saying, gotta go to Canada. And it's easy for me. I can take the train up there from Hudson, New York.
That's true. That's true. And once,
Piece of cake.
yeah, yeah, yeah. No, I've ridden the train from Montreal to New York City once, and I've also once with my family. I drove to Albany and then rode Amtrak from Albany down to New York City. It was which was wonderful.
Yeah. So, no, Montreal we've actually been talking about a trip to Montreal, so that is an extra incentive.
Absolutely.
Yeah, I just wanna get to Canada. I can't get to China as easily as I used to, so I'll but, there's lots of other countries.
There
So,
are. And well, if you are in Canada, certainly please, or if you come to Montreal, let us know, and we'd be
yeah.
happy to to meet you and
That
show you
would
a few
be
train things.
yeah, that would be terrific. I'd love to do that.
Sure.
All right, great, Ian. Thank you so much.
But likewise, an interesting conversation. Thank you so much for your time, and it was absolutely a pleasure. And let us know if we can ever help again.
Thanks for joining me at Train Time. Don't forget to subscribe. Send me your suggestions for future shows, and visit our YouTube channel, Train Campaign.